China, in fact, used very effectively the China-Bhutan engagement to consolidate the relations. It also made specific economic forays into Bhutan. So I think Bhutan-China relations in the past 3-4 years have matured to a certain extent. And this has really led to, I would say, stabilizing the nature of border perspectives which were there. So, on that count, I would say that this is the second phase of China Bhutan relations. And the second, in fact, if post 2016 in particular, we see the positions of multiple parties have become very, very clear. And I say this because initially India was of the position that this is a bilateral issue, at least in the public domain, and it's something for both Bhutan and China to look at. But post 2016, particularly specifically, I would say 2017, a statement came out in the public domain that India is very much concerned about the nature of the boundary negotiations between Bhutan and China. So for the first time, India came out in the public domain saying that the tri-junction issue really concerns it. So to say, there was a shift from, I would say, a defensive position to a more offensive position. And China, on its part, came out explicitly out in the public domain, citing the 1890 Anglo-Chinese Convention, putting its positions again very clear as to where it stands on the China-Bhutan dispute. So, on that count, I would say that while it is really a continuation of what has happened in the past, on one hand, but secondly, it's also about the onset of a new level of engagement because of the consolidation, the nature of Bhutan-China talks that have happened so far. So I think I'll end up here and maybe come in later.
Okay, thank you, Medha. That was unexpectedly very quick. We thought that we had structured this thing by requesting the speakers. They can take 10 minutes in the first round if they wish.
All right.
If you want to continue for another few minutes, please do. Otherwise, if you're okay, then we can go. What would you like?
Okay. I was thinking maybe it's
5 minutes.
question by question, but then if Professor Stopdan, you want to come in, please do.
I think I should.
Yeah. Now, okay. Okay. Thank you, Medha. So we will now request Dr. Amit Ranjan. You may speak for 10 minutes in the first round.
Good afternoon, Professor Hemant, and I'm delighted to join this panel, especially the panelist, Professor Medha, Dr. Joshi, and Ambassador Stopdam, who I have read their works, especially while looking at Bhutan. Professor Medha's work is one of the most important work, which has been cited across the world. And looking at the border issue, Dr. Joshi's book and his small writings for The Wire and ORF. Ambassador Stopdan's work on Himalaya is one of the wonderful. So it's great to be a part of this panelist. When I start looking this Bhutan-China issue, I see that what the payoff which Thimphu is going to get engagement with China, because we have to look from their direction, from their angle also. So because nation states cooperate, ready to make adjustments, accommodate the other countries' demand, and even agree to make some notable compromises when there is a favorable payoff. And I see Bhutan's engagement with China and its eagerness to end territorial disputes must have some payoff with him. The question is what payoff Bhutan is with settling the boundary disputes with China. If we look at briefly look at India's ties with Bhutan, we'll see India is the closest friend of Bhutan and economic partner. Since 2014, India's trade with Bhutan has almost tripled from $484 million in 2014-15 to $1.42 billion in 2021-22, accounting for about 80% of Bhutan's overall trade. Bhutan's most important economic pillar, that is hydropower sector, which contributes about 14% of the country's gross domestic product and brings 26% of the government revenues, highly depend on India's investment. Furthermore, India continuously provides budgetary aid to Bhutan. In 2023, for example, India's aid to Bhutan rose from INR 2266 crore to INR 2400 crore. But despite this close ties that Thimphu and New Delhi have, there are some problems. For instance, growth in hydropower sector has not taken what was mutually agreed in 2008. In 2008, India and Bhutan committed to jointly produce around 10,000 megawatt by 2020. So far, the country's total installed capacity is 2326 megawatts, up from 1480 megawatts in 2008. Then there is a growing hydropower debt situation Bhutan is facing. The grant amount from India has declined. For instance, Puchangchu 1 was funded with a 40% grant and 60% loan from India, while the second part of the project had only 30% grant and 70% loan. The annual interest rate on the loans is 10%. The total hydropower debt at present in Bhutan is about 70% of its external debt and over 80% of the country's gross domestic product. Looking at this issue, 2017, Tenzing Lamsang, the editor of Bhutanese, he has written a wonderful piece in Indian Express with title "More Than Doklam Issue, Bhutan Worries About Hydropower Deficit." That was his the title of the piece. So now, with this background, let's briefly discuss India's ties and what are the areas of attention. So if we come to payoff, before 2017 and after 2017, after the Doklam crisis, a large number of Bhutanese, although appreciate Thimphu's close ties with New Delhi, but there are those who feel that Bhutan also needs to establish close links with China. Even in his interview, Bhutan Prime Minister Lote Tshering has categorically said that Bhutan could not remain shut off from China. On diplomatic ties, in an interview with Suhasini Haidar, he said that, and I quote, "Theoretically, how can Bhutan not have any bilateral relations with China? The question is when and in what manner." So it means that Bhutan is looking ahead to establish not full diplomatic ties, but at least some sort of links with China, like other South Asian countries. However, finally, I conclude here that given the ties and dependence Thimphu has on New Delhi, I don't think that Bhutan will do anything which may be harmful to New Delhi's interest. So I end my first part of this presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Amit Ranjan. Well, frankly, I was not actually prepared for our speakers to wind up their first round so quickly. We have time. So may I turn to you, Ambassador Subdan?
Well, thank you, Hemant. I'm not an expert of Bhutan or some kind of that, but generally have some interaction with the strategic community of Bhutan, both in Delhi and Thimphu. Very long association with those people. So I have little understanding of what's happening there, and often I do read the editorials of the Bhutanese media.
Manoj Joshi is the co-host now.
But I don't think the issues are very big. The issues involved here are limited in nature, but substance is in nuances. A lot of nuances, we, the Tibetan background people, don't speak in too many words. Very, very silent kind of people, very muted, but we convey a lot of things. So there are hidden messages here what the Bhutanese are trying to say or not to say. But I'm also not surprised. It's not unexpected. This will not happen. This change, or you may call it activism from the Bhutanese side or the Chinese side, was expected for a very long time, particularly since the Doklam incident. A lot of activities, not just on Bhutan, but even on us. Doklam was followed by Vice Foreign Minister's visit to Thimphu by Chinese. It was also followed by Wuhan process with us. It didn't work with us because of 370 and Galwan, but in the case of Bhutan, it worked. There was a willingness in the Bhutanese side, on the Bhutanese side, to go along with what the Chinese are saying. But certainly with us, this really hasn't worked. And post Galwan, things have changed in a reverse way. So that activism, both on pressure and the diplomacy with China, has not brought any change. But as far as the Bhutanese issues are concerned, I think 40 years of negotiations since, I don't know, so many years now, 1996, and 25 rounds of talks. On the face of it, it looks like, it's a process bound. It's not a political, but it's a long process bound border negotiation. That's the impression given. But to me, this sudden activism by DNT, the current ruling party of Bhutan, the Duk Namrup Sospa, these people led by Lote Tsering has speeded up the process. He met that as an election issue. Diversification of foreign policy of Bhutan is a major agenda, plus the border discussion with China, opening up more embassies in Thimphu. These are the priority issues of this government. And therefore, what you see here now is that DNT party has, since 2018, it came to power, has stepped up. This three-step roadmap, TSR, was signed in 2021. Apparently in Wutaishan, all the places in Wutaishan. Wutaishan is not very far away from Beijing. It's in Shaanxi province. It is the headquarters of Gelugpa sect, not the Drukpa sect of Bhutan. Whether the Chinese are naive about it or perhaps ignorant about it, but they took the Bhutanese delegation to Wutaishan. And there this three-step roadmap was clinched. A memorandum of understanding and split into so many working groups and technical survey groups and many other things. The entire process was to delay it and perhaps to expand in such a manner that more and more Bhutanese diplomats and negotiators get involved and get the idea about the necessity to have border discussion or border resolution. Lote Tsering became very vocal in the process. A lot of optimism now. You see Bhutanese media, the entire social media and the media is full of optimism about how things has gone beyond expectation, and it's a historic deal. It's a landmark deal. Imagine this Dorji, Tandi Dorji, who was the foreign minister, is a good friend of mine, has been able to meet the Politburo member of the CCP, Wang Yi, was a foreign minister, unexpected, unprecedented. And it can be only now changed to a summit level between the two presidents and two prime ministers signing the border deal. That is the expectation on the diplomatic level, of the Bhutanese. So thanking the king, the throne of the enlightened wisdom, thanking India for not scuttling it. So therefore, there is a new era of trilateral relationship, new era that where Bhutanese will play a bridge role between India and China. But to me, it is the timing which is more important. The elections are coming. Next week, there'll be election on the 30th of this month. And DNT wants to come back to power with this success. Probably they wanted to clinch the deal during this month, but couldn't happen it. But MOU has been signed now. Obviously, these are well calculated, and perhaps the chances that India will scuttle it is very less because India itself is not able to deal with China. The Chinese are still sitting in Eastern Ladakh. Why should Bhutanese listen to you? You are at the weakest point. So when it comes to border point, I think this is the DNT's motivation to come back to power is the issue. Now the problem is whether they will be able to go ahead with this ambition. I doubt. Yes and no, but quite doubtful that internally, yes, I would say mindset in Bhutan has changed. Not in our favor. The perception about India in Bhutan is no different from what is happening in Maldives or perhaps in Nepal or somewhere else. But the attitude on the border changing from the survey of India map to a joint map of China and Bhutan, technically it's not a big deal. It's all pillars and some landmarking and some peaks and here and there. But it is the technology which the Chinese may have offered to measure the land and the border. And this process was completed long time ago, perhaps in 2010, 2015, 2012, and 13, where the old survey of India's pillars have been replaced by some more accurate scale map, which is not a big deal. But the point here is not about delineation of the boundary on the map or even on the field itself. The excuse given here is that it's not even about the differences of the border between the Bhutanese and the Chinese. They all have a common understanding. The whole excuse is about India. Therefore, delay it. Delay it to such an extent that India's objection get mollified. Indian objection can be altered, or India can be convinced. I think Tandi Dorji was thankful to the Chinese for understanding Bhutanese concerns and problems, meaning that Bhutanese said we have this India problem. So therefore, let's go slow. So therefore, create an environment, create an atmosphere for change. I think that was the moot point, and this is how they went about. Delay also means that things would change in the future for worse. Delay would also mean good for India because we want Bhutanese to claim more territories in the Chumbi Valley, especially with regards to Doklam area. So this delaying tactic is something which is very interesting. And the delaying tactic is also being applied because they don't want to go by step-by-step process of three-phase negotiation, three-step TSR roadmap. They want to go all the three steps in one go. So therefore, they will not say what is the delineation on the map, what is the survey on the map, a survey on the ground, and what is the demarcation on the ground. All three processes will be announced in one go in a big bang way. So I think new words have been used, new diplomatic language has been used. But it's true that all these developments and the statement made by Foreign Minister and the Prime Minister of Bhutan indicate there is a shift in the foreign policy in a very different way. To my own understanding and my understanding with the people in Bhutan in a private conversation, as this shift has occurred in 3-4 ways and 3-4 reasons. One is the Sikkim factor. of 1974. Bhutanese have been very, very concerned about what India did in Sikkim, is the merger. Secondly, when Kazi Lundup Dorji Khangsarpa, he was the first chief minister of Sikkim, and he was instrumental in the Sikkim merger with India, died in 2007. There was an editorial in Kunsal, I think in Bhutanese newspaper, saying that look at Kazi Lundup. He died like a dog. Nobody even cared what happened to this man. India didn't even look at him. He was alone in Kalimpong. I don't know whether his wife was around, but he died with his servants. This is how India has treated Kazi Lundup, and saying that this can happen with us also. So therefore, be careful with New Delhi. What you do, don't surrender. This was post Doklam, before Doklam. The third factor is there is this lot of activism by Americans and the Tibet issue in Arunachal Pradesh. You know, they are very sensitive. We in India take, all this Bhutan, Sikkim, Tibet, all this Himalaya, Tibet, all this thing is in one color. No, there are many, many fault lines. And if you are not careful at one place, you will be complicating yourself elsewhere. And 2017, Richard Verma, all these things visit to Arunachal Pradesh, created some kind of confusion in Thimphu. Then there was this diplomatic failure of withdrawing our subsidy in 2013. There were other imperatives of demographic change, ideological change in India, cultural issues, demographic issues. You know, my conversation with Bhutanese that, look, you are a Ladakhi, are you comfortable in India? Well, I said, not so as before. I said, then imagine about us. We are not even Indian. So the Bhutanese are noticing the changes in India, the political changes in India. So their threat perception is also changing. So this is another matter. Now, challenge ahead is that what will happen? Whether the border settlement come first or the opening of the Chinese embassy come first in Thimphu. Difficult, but the Bhutanese want the Chinese to open their embassies first. Obviously, these are difficult issues. It creates a lot of discomfort in New Delhi. But what I see in media and elsewhere is that we are uncomfortable. But politically or at the level of the government, there are no such indication of discomfort at the official level. But at the same time, I think there is an understanding that Bhutan is changing. The old method of dealing with the smaller state is also changing. There's nothing like protectorate state any longer in this world in 21st century. The old method of extending, generosity, economic aid, humanitarian aid, these things are old ideas. Imagine we've given so much to Maldives, and yesterday we were told to get out from Maldives. All these things, must take note. Every country is going through a lot of change, and they're noticing all this. So therefore, I think what an elected government now, since there is a democracy in Bhutan, and any elected parties in Bhutan will expect to do business with a foreign country on the basis of some commercial viability, rather than giving some, in India we have something called dan, giving donation. You collect punya, the merit. That's a medieval concept. We criticize Chinese debt diplomacy. It puts country into debt. But the Chinese are not fool. What is the other way? They give donation. That also doesn't work. We have seen with Sri Lanka. We have seen with Maldives. We have seen with other countries. Our methodology also doesn't work. In the case of Bhutan also, how long you can buy friendship? You cannot buy friendship. So it has to be something more dignified manner of dealing with smaller nation. This is understandable. So threat perception is not in the 60s and the 70s where your sovereignty is threatened, your territorial integrity is threatened. Your threat perception is threatened because of culture, because of demography, because of ideology. And this is visible in the minds of the Bhutanese. They do feel threatened. If you go to southern Bhutan, you have this, why are they building the new roads? Or what are the intentions? All those things are, new issues are now coming up. So therefore, willing to end their isolation and diversifying their foreign policies is the key. And this is how I see that we cannot obviously address all these problems of Bhutan, but we can certainly have a new framework for partnership that can give more leverages to Bhutan to negotiate with the Chinese. But otherwise, this old style diplomacy is unlikely to work, especially with democracy, which we desire in Bhutan. Theocracy is not possible. The monarchy is not conducive. So we prefer democracy. Democracy comes with a price. There will be demands, aspirations among the people for better life. And how do they get better life? Not depending on aid and donation from others. So that is a dilemma now. But this dilemma is not necessary in our mind because Bhutanese repose trust in us, not because of some political reason, but because of some, what you may call it, some historical and metaphysical reason. Now, this metaphysical aspect of Bhutanese are not going to change tomorrow. This is where we don't apply in our foreign policy, in our diplomacy, what is metaphysics. That is the problem. It's a Western way of doing diplomacy. We do not know the nuances of what it means. Even the historical perspective is missing in our diplomacy. But we need to be careful in dealing with Bhutan. So the scenario that I see now here is that, will Bhutan go ahead with China without taking India into confidence? Yes, but will not cross certain red lines. That's for sure. That Bhutanese will not cross a red line beyond a point. Will they slow down the talks with the Chinese if the DNT doesn't come back to power? Possible. The process of talk, the speed of the talk with the Chinese might slow down. It is quite possible the next government may not do the same thing which the DNT has done. The third scenario is that let Bhutan do whatever it wants to do. After all, it is an independent country. We cannot stop. Let it do. But we will do whatever is possible in our interest. Especially when it comes to our key security and strategic concern, we will deal with it, come what may. And we don't care for Bhutan, what they say. So that could be a worse kind of an option that we might pursue. Otherwise, things are quite on the expected line, but there is a Chinese habit of, they have applied everywhere this methodology of not giving any result till the, some gain is expected by the Chinese. If that is not fulfilled, the Chinese will not give any result to the Bhutanese. I think I'll stop here. Maybe some more Q&A later on.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Ambassador Stockton. That was really very, very comprehensive. You have raised a wide range of very intriguing and fundamental issues, both relating to what is happening or changes happening in the thinking in Bhutan, as well as what is happening in the handling of diplomatic front and many more issues, of course. We'll come back to it. I'm sure this is going to generate a lot of discussion during the question and answer session. Thank you so much. May I now request Dr. Manoj Joshi, who was very kind to adjust time in between. I think he has several engagements today, and he's finally managed to log in and join us today. Dr. Joshi, your 10 minutes now, and then, of course, we will have another round.
Thank you, Hemant. Broadly, I go along with what Ambassador Stobdan has just said. I want to make certain points which will kind of supplement that, in my view. Now, see, the Bhutan-China MOU itself was a kind of a fait accompli, as far as I'm concerned. So that the three-step roadmap, etc. Basically, a lot of work has already been done. But the reality is that China has already occupied or is in the process of occupying areas of Bhutan that it claims. I'm still, if you look at the case of Doklam. Now, in the case of Doklam, the Indians intervened. Then there was an agreement that the two sides will move back, 100 meters, 200 meters each. So we moved back to the top of the ridge. Chinese moved back 200 meters, but almost immediately they occupied, they started building military facilities across Doklam, and then they started building the Shaokang village, Pangda, and the road coming south from that area. So, as I said, there is already a fait accompli. Now, the very interesting thing is that in my talks with Bhutanese diplomats, including an ambassador, whenever you raise this issue, they say China does not occupy any territory of Bhutan. They say that, no matter what you can say, no matter what satellite pictures say, Chinese are not occupying any territory of Bhutan. That is their blunt thing. Now, of course, you know that the Chinese claim vary from three sectors: Western Bhutan, Doklam, three regions in the north. And in June 2020, they started asserting the southern claim. Now, the southern claim, of course, has big implications for us because it is south of the Indian border, south of the Tawang Tract. How serious the Chinese are about that, I don't know. Maybe this was just a kind of a negotiating strategy. Now, going back to the thing, the border talks began in '84, and the Chinese had been pushing this package proposal since 1990, and it was almost came through. The king, in fact, told his National Assembly the 10th round of talks, the Bhutanese had appeared willing to concede to the Chinese. But when the two sides met for the 11th round in '96, Bhutan backed off. And the popular conception was that they backed off on Indian pressure. And after that, so in 1998, China and Bhutan signed an agreement to freeze their border. Now, we know that freezing has not been done. For Chinese, no, there is no agreement is final. And likewise, this thing with the Bhutanese also, the agreement is not final. So the Chinese have been encroaching through the use of graziers and the construction of roads in disputed territory. Now, around each of the border, an expert group talks took place in 2016, just before the Doklam crisis. You see? And then the Chinese started building the road towards the Zompelri Ridge. But no sooner had India, as I said, that the Bhutanese re-established themselves the Doklam Plateau. Now, the Indian reaction was very peculiar. speaking before the parliamentary committee, Foreign Secretary and his predecessor, meaning the current External Affairs Minister, they virtually told the committee that as far as India is concerned, what we can see from the ridge on top of Doklam is all that matters. What is happening in the rest of Doklam is not our concern. This is what they told the committee, though this part was not published in the committee report. Now, you know that since then, there has been this report by Robert Barnett, which has revealed that since 2013, the Chinese have been building a network of roads, buildings, military posts in the areas they have claimed in northern Bhutan as well. In short, they are occupying whatever they claimed in Bhutan. Now, border negotiations, in my view, therefore, are being held for the form of it. Chinese already control what they're really interested, what they are really interested in. Now, in my view, Chinese controlling the Zompelri or Jamperi Ridge is not such a disaster as has been made out. It is true for the Indian military calculation is that will be a major development. And in fact, Indian military plans are that in the event of confrontation with China, the Indian military will occupy the Jamperi Ridge. I mean, those are the plans. But in my view, that I think we are getting too excited about that because India occupies extremely strong positions in Sikkim. We occupy that whole ridge which goes up, past Dokala, up to northern Sikkim. We have strong positions there. And in fact, it's the Chinese who should feel vulnerable in the Chumbi Valley. This was the threat which was implicitly issued by General Sundarji in 1986-87. When he landed forces in northern Sikkim, he placed armor in northern Sikkim, which implicitly threatened to cut off the Chumbi Valley. Now, I personally think, therefore, that this business of Jamperi Ridge is too defensive a response. We can also adopt a more offensive kind of a position there. For the Bhutanese, securing a comprehensive agreement in the border is the highest priority. So they have a major problem, I think, which we often don't understand. They are an underpopulated South Asian country. They have just about, according to some estimates, anything between 7 to 7.5 lakh people in an area which is 38,000 square kilometers. So they are a little smaller than Denmark, with 1/7 the population of Denmark. So they don't have the capacity to police those borders. And this has become very apparent if you look at some of the discussions in their National Assembly, you will see this. Now, as far as, and I think Ambassador Stobdan raised this issue, will their embassy come first or will the settlement come first? My own view is that what they will do is that they will say that we welcome the embassies of all P5 countries. And, two P5 countries are interested, that is the United States and China. They will establish their embassies there. But, de facto, what that would mean. See, now, so far, Thimphu has successfully walked the tightrope between the two giant neighbors, even while making it clear that it would not like to play off New Delhi against Beijing. Now, with regard to the Doklam area, there is another factor that came in during the Doklam crisis, which was the revelation that India and China have an agreement as of 2012. The agreement reached between the two special representatives that all tri-junctions will be decided in consultation with the third country. So any tri-junction, the India-Bhutan, the India-China tri-junction has to be decided in consultation with Bhutan. And Bhutan is aware of this. So if Bhutanese are wanting to trade their other Western claims and the Northern claims, it doesn't really matter to us. So if it comes to Doklam, there is still a way out. If the Chinese are willing to stand up, agree to the what the special representatives have agreed to, if they are willing to uphold that, there will be no determination of the tri-junction. And I think there is a way out for Bhutan, therefore, to go through with this whole thing without necessarily dealing with the Doklam issue at this juncture. So I'll conclude here and go on with the discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Joshi. Well, we have now completed the first round, and I'm sure already people are ready with their questions. As we had mentioned to the speakers before the event today, that we will have second round also, in which each panelist can actually ask one question to the fellow panelist. If anyone has a specific question or a clarification to ask from the fellow speakers, you may please do it now. One question each for other panelists to the four speakers. Yes. Yes, Medha, go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Right, thank you. So, thank you. I think, maybe I just missed in the information of the format of the discussion today. So sorry about that. But, it's been an extremely interesting discussion, and two specific sort of thoughts which came to my mind after listening to Professor Stobden and, of course, Dr. Manoj Joshi. Now, it was very interesting the way Professor Stobden took us through the entire history. But, one of the things which I really feel is that if you really look at the opening of the negotiations between China and Bhutan, particularly post 1998, I really do see a grand strategic vision there of the Chinese in it, because it's been really well planned out. I think what they essentially did in 1998 was to open up a two-road map, where the first was primarily hinged on engaging Bhutan through the border talks, which they effectively did. And the second was to really lay the claims on ground, which they did, by the way, I think in the first decade of the millennium till 2010. And I think around that time, the Bhutanese were very, very vociferous also in terms of resisting and saying that the encroachments have been there. Post 2010, we see that sort of settling down, with the Bhutanese then coming up and saying that, well, there are no Chinese encroachment. And I think, when we are really looking at this China-Bhutan issue right now, there are many whys there. And I think what one really needs to ask is that, why are these misperceptions on ground? Because as I think from what happened from 2011 to 2016, many of the issues got sorted out. And once I think the Chinese had laid the claims on ground, 2017, 2016, or 2017 in particular, we see the Doklam standoff, and we see the positions becoming very, very stringent on ground. So, there is where my side of thought or my response to Professor Stobden's statement that, this is not really a strategic design out there. Because what I really see right now, I do see a grand strategic design of the Chinese. The 2021 is just, I would say, a curtain raiser of sorts, because what they have already decided, the JTT or the MOU three-step dialogue that has been brought forward in 2021 and in 2023 now, is just a culmination of whatever has happened, I think, in the past 20 years. So I think it's a long-term view, and the Chinese have gone very systematically about, looking at this whole approach. Even the cards, I think, which came out later post 2016 are very interesting. The entire discourse changed from, to the 1890 convention. And there is where I think Dr. Manoj Joshi's interventions were very, very helpful. I think he was one of those few amongst many who actually talked about the 1890 convention first. So that was because, and there is where my question to you, Professor Joshi, is, you talk about, and that's something which when I was very intrigued about, when you look at India's position in the public domain, they go back to this 2012 special representative talk, saying that the tri-junction will be decided, the India-China tri-junction will be decided in consultation with a third country. Now, well, for the Chinese, the way they've really responded, they've said, and this is again in the public domain, officially they've said that, this will only be relevant for the talks which will be held post 2012. And when it really comes to the issue between India and to the issue between China and Bhutan, the question is really the 1890 convention. So in a way, what I'm really trying to say, the Chinese have really set aside the 1890, the 2012 SR talks. They've said that it has no relevance for Bhutan at all, for the Bhutan-China negotiations. The 2012 minutes, at least, when I was just looking at the records of the Indian government, I couldn't really see them there, except for 2 or 3, hints which have been made in some of our press briefings. But apart from that, there is nothing out in the public domain. So I think, that's really a messy domain here. And something which I'll just end with this, and that's my whole analysis of this issue. And I've written also extensively about it. I think there has been a compromise formula when it really comes to India, to China-Bhutan border negotiations. And this compromise, and this primarily can be, I would say, reified by the fact that the Bhutanese have been saying there are no Chinese encroachment. Since 2012, we have been seeing flags, Chinese flags, sort of flying high in the contested area. So I think that there has been some sort of a negotiation adjustment where the Chinese have come with a formula state, and this is very different from the Indian position that the boundary line actually starts with the highest peak, the Matangla, and the other one I'm forgetting, but it really is, the starting point is really Mount Jekmoche. So I think I'll end here. But when it comes to India and when it really comes to China-Bhutan negotiations, the 2012 issue is a big question mark. And second, I think one has to really look at the Chinese strategic design, which has been in a way driving the China-Bhutan border negotiations. Yeah, it's Chinchu-Lampa and Merugula peaks, where the India stand is that the boundary starts from there, where and the Chinese say that no, it starts from Mount Jekmoche. Yeah, so I'll end there.
Thank you, Medha. This time you overshot your time. Anyway, so I'll request Dr. Manoj Joshi and Ambassador Stockton both to not immediately respond to Medha's point now. We can adjust it during the question and answer session, because we are now, it seems, running out of time. But the other panelists, if they have, Amit, if you have any other question, please go ahead.
I am sorry. Actually, I also missed the message in your mail, and so I just ended shortly, in very 5 minutes to 7 minutes. Professor Medha has already talked about thing on Bhutan 1819 convention at 2012. I just want to open this up a bit to look at the India's neighborhood policy in last 5 years or 10 years. To look at, so how we are doing. If you look at what happened in Maldives, what happened in Nepal after 2015-16, the economic blockade which the government of India has never accepted. Look at means we cannot talk about the Pakistan. Look at Sri Lanka, Gotabaya's under the Gotabaya's brothers. So it's just a reflection of India's neighborhood policy in Bhutan also going on. And then look at the Chinese pattern of how they are moving in South Asia, where they know that India has a big influence. Still, India has a better influence than China, but how they are slowly moving and then occupying a dominant space, both within the government and both within the public. So, Professor Joshi, Professor Medha Bisht, and Ambassador Stockton. So, do you look? It's a part of this in the failure of India's neighborhood policy to some extent, which I feel, yes, it is, that we are not able to perceive the Chinese move, and we are not able to look at what our neighbors want from us. Instead of we are trying to say that, okay, so you have to do this, we are with you, and then we want them to be commanded by us, not what the real problem they are facing and how they are moving.
Okay, Dr. Joshi and Ambassador Stobden, very quick response to the questions asked to you or observation you want to make, but very quick because we will go to question answer round.
So I'll, with regard to what Medha had spoken about, see, Bhutan is not party to the 1890 convention. Bhutan was simply told that the border begins from Mount Gipmochi, and this is how it goes. You see, so Bhutan can always say that we are not. How does Bhutan come into the picture in 1890? That's a bit of a conundrum in itself. As far as the Indian claim with the border goes, see, this has been the Indian position on the McMahon line and other this thing. We simply say that's the highest crest. That this was the intention of the treaty. The intention of the treaty was the water parting between Mochu and the Tista River. So we are going. So it is true that our position is also, in that sense, it's not graven in a 100% agreement. It's on our view that this is what the situation is. The letter of the treaty backs the Chinese position because the letter of the treaty specifically mentioned Mount Gipmochi. See, very, very clearly. And as I said, Bhutan is not party to it. The second point, in South Asia, China, I think, sees Bhutan, where it does not even have an embassy, as the last frontier. Having made inroads into Indian preeminence in Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Beijing would like to challenge New Delhi's special relationship with Bhutan as well. And I think recent events, including the Doklam issue and the revival of their Eastern claim, that revival of the Eastern claim was very surprising, are a means of continuing Chinese pressure on the Bhutanese to comply with their demands. And in my view, in any case, as I said, that as satellite imagery is showing, the Chinese have already occupied what they have wanted. They already occupy what they wanted. Now it's just the formal part left.
Okay. Thank you. Ambassador Stobden, do you want to make a quick observation?
Well, I don't want to. I presume that Doklam is not part of the 3-point roadmap, 3-step roadmap. That's why I'm not covering it. But I agree with Medha because I didn't want to go before 2001 because of the time, because you might go too much into history. But yes, I do agree that if you go according to the National Assembly discussion in Bhutan, all the concerns about Chinese assertion have been expressed only after 2000. All the Tibetan intrusion of the nomads, the PLA incursions, the loss of grazing, all that activities on the road, the new prosperous village, Sikang, since 2006 onwards, all this thing came up in the mid 2006. Please remember that since 2006, when railway came to Lhasa, and by 2014, when the railway came to Shigatse, Tibet became the central point of all the activities. And therefore, the assertion towards Bhutan and India become inevitable. Whether you like it or not, that's another matter. But that is the thirst of the Chinese policies, economic policies, connectivity policy. There are a whole lot of things happening on Bhutan. So the money is being spent in Tibet. So it will have some kind of an impact in the surrounding area. I think it is because of that pressure the Bhutanese have to give up, the Kula Kangri in the north. Now, it is the Kula Kangri which actually started the entire thing. I agree that's a mistake of the Bhutanese to agree to the point that Kula Kangri must not be shown in the Bhutanese map since 2006. That was the beginning of all the mistakes. And then it was followed by other issues that there is a village in Chinese village in Bhutan. There is the Sakteng sanctuary issue. There are many other issues, and every Bhutanese authorities tries to justify saying that no, there is no such Chinese village. There is no Chinese incursion. There is nothing like that, including my friend Mr. Namgyal, is the Message Namgyal, was the ambassador here. They're completely denying. So those things then accumulated into such a thing that the Chinese understood. Chinese understood the pressure, and then obviously this tri-junction thing came up. Both Doklam and in the Sakteng area in near Arunachal Pradesh, that made the entire border issue more messy. Otherwise, what was the issue between Bhutan and China? Nothing. There were some few peaks here and there, and some grazing area in the Ha area in Bhutan. There were not major difference between Bhutan and China on the boundary issue. There were some Tibetan activities here and there, but that means nothing. So this whole historical background is very interesting, but that becomes too much academic. I wanted to be more current in the sense that whatever's happened since 2018, 19, post Doklam, that really created or steered a lot of trouble in the relationship. There is a realization, but most people try to say that this cannot happen in isolation. This has to have something to do with India, China's India policy. Well, generally that's accepted, but that's more rhetorical. But then why do you get played into the Chinese hand? If that is thing that everything is China-centric policy, whether it's in Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Pakistan, if it is all about India, then I find it very funny because that we continuously get played into the Chinese hand. Why do we an adversarial relationship with everyone? The question is then, what are we doing to change that? That question has never been answered. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ambassador Stobden. Now, before we go into the question and answer round, I'll make very quick observations on the discussion so far. And I think for reasons best known to either the speakers or whatever, there are a couple of issues which actually were not reflected in the discussion so far. For example, this was the 25th round, was held in Beijing. Bhutan was represented by the Bhutanese foreign minister, which was the first ever visit by a Bhutanese foreign minister to China. And it's very significant in its own right. That's one. And second, it's very interesting, although Ambassador Stobden mentioned just now that, bringing history into the discourse is more like academic rather than any practical relevance here. But if I may, look at the propaganda, especially in the Chinese narrative. When I look at the Chinese commentaries and analysis in China, they are referring to Bhutan as China's traditional neighbor. Whereas before 1951, even in the Chinese literature, they never acknowledged or accepted Bhutan as their neighbor. They always considered Bhutan as part of Tibet. And they continue to claim in their literature that since, as they claim that Tibet became Chinese, under Chinese rule or control or whichever word you use, since the 7th century AD, so is Bhutan as part of Tibet. That's an interesting area to look at. And third, although Dr. Joshi mentioned in passing the revival of the eastern sector, but the Chinese new demand to include in the package of the eastern sector of the wildlife sanctuary. That's also a very significant change in the Chinese earlier position of the package deal, now including this. And lastly, I think that pertains to what Ambassador Stobden had earlier mentioned about whether Bhutan is now pressing ahead for a diplomatic relationship with China first, and therefore the Chinese embassy, and the demarcation or the settlement of the boundary later on. I think from the Chinese point of view, they are very keen set up diplomatic relations with Bhutan at the earliest possible. May not be embassy, but at least diplomatic normalization, because the Chinese narrative claims that China, being one of the P5 countries, if has a diplomatic relations with Bhutan as soon as possible, then the other P5 countries will also follow suit. And once the P5 countries have established diplomatic relations with Bhutan, that will put a lot of pressure on India. And that is what the Chinese propaganda claims. That is another dimension of it. With these quick observations, I thank you all, and now invite the questions from the floor. I see one hand already raised, Mr. Rapai. I think, Rapai, you can straight away ask your question. Rapai, are you there?
Gabriel is the co-host now.
I said, yeah, now it is. Thank you, Haman. I have only two brief questions. Thank you for the discussion to all the panelists. So I won't name the panelists, but only on Tibetan, on the Buddhist issue, I would like Ambassador Stobden to answer. The other, any panelist can answer. The first question on this thing, what is happening around this India-Bhutan relations? What will be the impact across India's Tibetan community, different groups? Stobden understands that. He mentioned about the Chinese, the Gelugpa sect and their interactions. But because the Tibetans, especially the Dalai Lama, set up a lot of links to Bhutan. And what will be the influence along our Himalayan border in the communities, and how it will affect us, number one. Secondly, about to Manoj Joshi and others, the issue is what happened to our foreign policy. On the one side, we were talking about more robust diplomacy, but I think in the process, do you think that we forgotten or we didn't care about the smaller neighbors? What is the reaction of, because Maldives came in the discussions, Nepal, there are issues. So what is happening around us? Please highlight the problem. Thank you.
Okay, Ambassador Stobden, you can respond to Rafai's question on the impact on the Tibetan.
I think we are discussing something on border, not about relationship countries. This Buddhist factor. Hello.
Yeah, it is closely linked. That only that issue I have.
Yeah, the only thing I could understand from the timing of this border negotiation is that once they are able to have a full-fledged diplomatic relationship with Bhutan, the Chinese are able to scuttle the reincarnation of Dalai Lama, next Lama, because there are only 4 countries, the Mahayana Buddhist, or should we call it Vajrayana Buddhist countries, which are member of the United Nations. One is Russia, second is Mongolia, third is Bhutan, and fourth is India. Thailand, Sri Lanka, and the rest do not come under the Vajrayana category. Only these 4 countries will have some kind of a international say in the matter. So the Chinese have been trying to scuttle now the Dharamshala's choice of the next boy. I think here for the Chinese, having a better relationship with Bhutan will lessen the prospect of the Indian candidate or Dharamshala candidate. There is same thing in Mongolia happening. The new fellow has been found. The birth of the Dalai Lama of Mongolia, Jipsum Tamba. There again, I think Chinese are expected to. Dalai Lama has outsmarted the Chinese by selecting a boy, but I think Chinese will respond very soon. With regards to Russia, I think the Chinese-Russian relationship is too strong to make a difference. So that remains Dharamshala and India. So that is the only question which the Buddhist aspect of the Tibetan Buddhist aspect is concerned, of the importance of Bhutan into this. But although there are sectarian differences where the Bhutanese will not have much say in the next reincarnation, but Bhutan is a member of the United Nations. It will have some say in the international matters. So otherwise, those sectarian problems continue. The fact that His Holiness Dalai Lama doesn't visit Thimphu, never, ever, speaks volume. I mean, even for religious activities, he doesn't go there. That well, these are not supposed to be discussed. These are not the issues also again. But since you have asked me about the Buddhist aspect, Buddhism is not an international issue at the moment, which affects boundaries. That is the only context that I see.
Okay, so to Rapai's second question, any panelist is welcome to answer that. What is happening to India's foreign policy vis-a-vis the smaller countries? That was the question.
Mostly on India's neighborhood policy.
Yeah, any one panelist who would like to answer that, please go ahead.
Mainly India's neighborhood policy.
Neighborhood policy. Yeah. You know,
neighborhood policy, which we, okay. Sorry.
You know, the point is, when it comes to resources, we see that China has the resources, meaning money. They put in big money in Sri Lanka, they put in big money in Pakistan, they put in Bangladesh, Nepal. I think so that is not something which we can easily manage. Our thing is that our practice of our policy has been somewhat uneven. Meaning we have had 2 blockades of Nepal, you see. In the case of Bhutan, 2013 election, we had rather crude interference in their election. We stopped the natural gas supply, and that party lost the election. So I think we need to develop some more nerve. India has to be cooler-headed in this process, because India has geography favors us. See, whether you're Nepal, whether you're Bhutan, you open out into India. And when you are Bangladesh, you're almost completely surrounded by India. When you are Sri Lanka, you are far away from everyone except India. So you have natural geographic advantages. And if you keep a level head, and I think we showed that earlier this year when Sri Lanka was going through an economic crisis, the one country that did stand along with Sri Lanka was India. So I think we need I think it is not this thing. I think it is the execution of our policy has been somewhat overbearing, and we need to check that. We need to become better at handling neighbors, because they are more sensitive, because we have natural advantages. We have geographical advantages, but we are not being able to take fully utilize them.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Joshi. If Medha and Amit, if you want to come in on this question very quickly, though.
So I'll just maybe, add 2 things here. One is that when it really comes to India's diplomacy with its neighbors, yes, there is, of course, as Professor Joshi said, the implementation issues related to practice. But secondly, it's also primarily very, very issue-centric, issue by issue area that I think needs to be dealt with. So that is one. The second is that if you really look at India's growing diplomatic practice in the recent years, one has to really move away from the shadows of the 70s and 80s, because I think now there is a distinct change in India's diplomatic response. And I'll give you an example on that. I mean, if you look at after the Doklam issue, after all this had been really then about Bhutan and China, questions being raised, questions being said that, we're watching the Sino-Bhutan negotiations closely. I think India has been barring the 2012, 2013, and there is where I see that this shift today. India is a bit mature in terms of handling its policies, and one has to not just restrict one to South Asia here, but India's overall global diplomacy. And what I really see, I see a 2-branched approach here. One is that India is now applying a lot of pragmatism in terms of external balancing on one hand, and the second is really being focused on internal balancing. So I think a subtle shift needs to be seen in the way India is also handling its diplomatic affairs, given the kind of issues it's facing in contemporary times.
Okay, thank you, Medha. Amit?
Yeah, adding to what Professor Joshi and Professor Medha said, I will make a few points quickly. One important thing which I feel that Indian diplomats and the foreign policy establishment, I think they fail to read what's going on the ground. To look at the case of Maldives, to look at the case of in 2016, 17, or 15, what happened in Nepal, and in other neighboring countries, even in Bangladesh after NRCCA. So they fail to read what there on the ground, and that affects the policy. That affects the policy, or at least of those countries. Second, to compete with China now, they have developed relation, more close relation with US, bringing US in the region. That may help India for a short term, but in longer term, it will contract India's position more in its region, more in South Asia. So that may be helpful in short term, but in long term, it's going to affect India also.
Okay, thank you, Amit. Now, I think, Muskan, can you please go to the chat box and see if there are questions? How much time we have? We have only 6 minutes left now.
Yes, so, I can see there are 3 questions in the chat box.
Okay, so let's begin with the first question, and if we don't have time to address the other questions, then maybe what we can do is we can post these questions to the panelists by email, and then they can respond on that. Is that fine? Anyway, Muskan, read out the first question, please.
Okay, so the first question is from Imranullah, and it's directed to Dr. Medha Bisht. He's asking that India, Pakistan, Nepal, China, Afghanistan, Bhutan, basically all the South Asian countries have many border issues, and they all are also part of this organization SAARC. So his question is why South Asian members can't find any solution for border issues and conflicts.
Medha, 1 minute.
All right. So I think, if you look at the history of South Asia, particularly SAARC, it's very, very difficult. And one has to really go back into the history. I'm sorry, but I'm going back to history because I think we cannot have historical amnesia in South Asia. But none of these bilateral issues can come under SAARC. Bilateral issues have to be dealt in bilaterally. And one of the reasons as to why SAARC moved forward is that the countries decided that we're going to focus on low-hanging issues like trade or issues which actually pertain to win-win solutions for the regional organization to move forward. So none of the bilateral issues are primarily appreciated or even taken in SAARC, primarily because of its mandate and the way the organization is sort of built.
Okay, thank you. Alka, can we extend this to another 5 or 10 minutes to address the remaining questions?
Okay, I think 10 minutes. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Next question, please.
The second question is by Venkat Raman, and his question is directed to Dr. Manoj Joshi. Can you comment on the Chinese new claims in eastern Bhutan, that is Sakteng Wildlife Sanctuary, and if these are occupied as well?
Manoj, unmute yourself.
Okay. Yeah. So, you see that right from the beginning, through I think 24 rounds of border talks, the Sakteng Sanctuary was not mentioned. The eastern claims of the Chinese were not mentioned. But in 2022, I think, suddenly there was something to do with the wildlife protection in Sakteng. The Chinese representative got up and said, look, we have some issues out there. And since then, this issue has come up between China and China has raised this issue. Now this can be either seen as a tactical development, that the Chinese want to use this as a pressure point, on Bhutan. Or you can see this as a more strategic issue, because the thing is that the location of Sakteng is south of the Tawang Tract. And as you know, the Chinese have said that the Tawang Tract is the basic minimum of their claim with regard to India. What they have been telling us in our border negotiations with them is that unless you give us Tawang Tract, we will not settle. So unless this is also linked in some complicated way to their Indian negotiation, it is possible. But as I said, in my view, I think it is a dormant claim. I don't think it's a very serious claim, and we'll have to see, because if the negotiations going on, and I don't think that the Bhutanese will be in any mood to concede anything as far as the eastern claim is concerned. And no, I think the person asked whether that is occupied by the Chinese. No, not a chance. They are nowhere near that particular claim. That area has a common border with India, but not with China.
Okay. Next question.
The third question is by Ambassador Kishan S. Rana, and it's for Ambassador Stobdan. Is it not simplistic to say that India has adversarial relations with all its neighbors? Do you have a solution for better management of these relations?
Okay. Well, it's not good to be critical of the government policies, but not to say anything is a bigger sin. You have to come from a place where you're surrounded by enemies. I come from a village where I'm whole night threatened by aircraft. I don't know which missile is going to hit me. I come from Leh. I don't want to be in this kind of a situation all the time in my life. I'm sure there is a problem, but I'm not a foreign policy maker now or any of these things in the neighboring countries. But it's a matter of perception. I feel the hostility everywhere, whether even in Bhutan. You know, if you are from Delhi, if you are a Hindu going to Thimphu, you come back with a different imagination. They know how to treat you. With me, they are very frank, because we share the same ethnicity, we share the same sect, we share the same thinking, and they open up. They open up. Even in Delhi, when I meet them in cocktail circuit, they say something different to me. So while I'm an Indian, but my thinking and understanding about what others are thinking about me is different from what others are telling you. So I'm only sharing my perspective. If you don't want to believe me, that's fine. Nobody's forcing anyone to believe, whether it is simplistic or not simplistic.
Okay, that's very interesting. Any more questions, Muskan, in the chat box?
No, sir, that's it.
Okay. I think with that, we can happily conclude this webinar on time, and with the promise that the issue is so important and sensitive, and that we will have to come back again discussing various other dimensions as the things unfold in the future. With that, I return the floor to MC for today.
Thank you, sir. Since I've got your formal permission to end today's session. With this, we would wrap up the session, and we thank the panelists and the chair for giving us their precious time. The video Good Neighbors, looking at India with China in mind. Information related to the same will be available on the ICS website, or you could also subscribe to our newsletters for regular updates. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you, everybody.